I didn't know I'd had cancer, obviously, until I went to the doctors, and we'd been travelling around Australia. And I'd been to the Bundy rum factory and had a few rums and got basically violently ill after that. And then I didn't get better. We came home, went to the doctor, and then she didn't look for cancer at that stage. The test she was doing was actually ruling out things that I may have had, like Giardia. She did a test for that, and then I think I had the prep, like I was going to have a colonoscopy, so I had that bowel prep where you clear yourself out. So she was sort of doing all that sort of thing, making sure there was no actual underlying things. And then finally she sent me for a CT scan and MRIs, and that's when we discovered that, there was something there. And so she sent me off to a specialist. And I had bloating of the stomach as well, and that's what they call ascites. So it was actually fluid on my tummy. And so in the process of going off to the specialist, I'd had my tummy drained as well, and they actually checked that fluid to see whether it had cancer cells in it, and it had cancer cells, and that's when they worked out it was actually ovarian cancer. So yes, you probably have ovarian cancer, and I'm sending you off to a specialist. And she said, "Don't worry, dear, but there's a 50-50 chance." And we looked at each other and said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, there's a 50-50 chance of success rate for ovarian cancer." And we said, "Okay." And then we just sort of left the surgery. That was it. And sort of got outside and had a chat and said, "Well, 50-50 is not good enough, you know. I'm not going to be with the bad 50-50, I'm going to be the good 50-50, you know. I don't like that 50-50. That's not going to be me." The doctor, he did the operation late-ish in the afternoon, and I think it was the next day. Yeah, it was the next day. He came and saw me, and he mentioned something about clinical trials, and at that stage, you know, I hadn't thought about it or anything like that. So he said, "There is a trial available if you want to go into the trial." And he said, "I'll send some." He did bring some information over with him about clinical trials, and he said, "I'll send up the clinical trials nurse, and she can explain it all to you and how the process works and what's involved and everything." And so that's what happened.
A clinical trial is a way that we test promising new drugs, devices, technologies in medicine to see whether or not they really work and are safe to use in human subjects or in patients. And in fact, to introduce any new drug or into practice, there has to be a clinical trial that shows it effective, otherwise it's not licensed for use. Some clinical trials are very simple. They involve trying to evaluate a way of doing things. And so it might be just a matter of filling out questionnaires, you know, and you can do that at home. You might have lots of questionnaires to fill out, but it's at home and that sort of stuff. And that's, you know, a basic simple trial, really. With some trials, it's a new drug treatment, or it's a prolongation of drug treatment, or it's an additional drug treatment, and that obviously requires extra time and commitment. It sometimes can mean more side effects because you're getting treatment for a longer time, or you're coming more often for treatment, and that therefore is an issue, and it's something for you as a patient that you have to think about. And some patients quite rightly feel that this is just all too much and more than they can handle, and they really just want to stay with the standard treatment, and that's perfectly okay. And others will say, look, I want this chance to participate in a trial, and I'm willing to make sacrifices, and we know that they're personal sacrifices.
The trials nurse explained to me that I would either get the standard arm of the trial or the standard plus one additional chemo plus another additional chemo plus another additional. So the trial I was on had 3 or 4 arms. So you get the standard treatment, you get the standard treatment plus A, if you like, you get the standard treatment plus B, and then plus C, you get the standard. So it wasn't as if you weren't getting a placebo or anything like that. You'd always have at least the standard treatment that was current at that stage. So, yeah. So when I didn't get on an A or B or C arm, I was a little bit disappointed, but I got on the standard arm, so the standard arm worked just without having the extra chemo drugs. So yeah, and the trial itself was every 3 weeks I'd have chemo, and it went on. I had 8 cycles of chemo, whereas currently the standard arm was six lots of chemo. So there was extra side effects came into it. I'm quite pleased I went on the clinical trial. I think my follow-up after the trial was a lot more intense, if you like, but no more inconvenient. Like I had to keep a diary during the trial, and I had extra blood tests during the trial. I also had to do a questionnaire, what they call a lifestyle questionnaire. This was done probably every 3 months, and how I was feeling, how did I feel last week, how different symptoms I might have had, and it asks the same questions every time. The whole clinical trial is your choice. If you start the trial, you always have the opportunity to get out of the trial, and that was spelt out everywhere, and was often said to me, do you want to continue into the trial? And I said, yeah, that's fine. I'm quite happy to continue with it. If you felt inconvenienced or uncomfortable or whatever was happening, you didn't feel right with it, you always had the chance to opt out of the trial. So yeah, it wasn't a chore as such. I didn't see it as a chore.
The benefit for you is that you get a chance to get a new drug or a new treatment that would not otherwise be available to you. The benefit also to you is that you will be helping other people in the future. It's an altruistic thing. Even if you don't get the new drug, and if you get the standard drug, a successful completion of this trial will then allow us to decide whether or not this new treatment is beneficial, and so you'll be helping people in the future even if you don't directly benefit from it yourself. And we also know that patients who are on clinical trials, because of the nature of a clinical trial and because of its somewhat experimental nature, that we actually keep a closer eye on patients who are on clinical trials, and that is whether or not you're in the experimental arm or whether or not you're in the standard arm, because we don't actually often know which arm you're in. And so everybody who's on a clinical trial gets additional tests, additional checkups, and in many ways that's beneficial for the patients as well. And in fact, it has been shown sometimes that whether or not you're in the standard arm or in the new drug arm, you do better regardless being on a clinical trial, and that's a real benefit.
I was hoping to get a benefit out of it, not knowing at this stage what the trial was, of course. Hoping to get a benefit out of it, but obviously to help the generations, the other family members and the generations, that are after me. So, yeah.
Most advances in cancer treatments have been made on the back of clinical trials, because clinical trials are the only way that we can introduce new drugs and new treatments into practice in general. And so yes, I would say clinical trials are absolutely worth it. They're a way of getting us to improve how we do things. If we didn't do clinical trials, we would still be back in the 1950s with our cancer treatments, and that's not a good thing, So the improvements in survival over the decades have been in a large part related to the use of clinical trials to determine what drugs are effective and what drugs don't work and therefore shouldn't be used. Cheryl was, at a very difficult time when she was diagnosed with a cancer and was facing, life-threatening issues, put up her hand and said, "Look, I'm up for it."
Every day I wake up and think, oh, I'm alive today, yes. I don't care what the weather's like. It's great to be alive.